Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Tuesday, September 10th. Today is day 340 since the attacks by Hamas on the south of Israel on October 7th. There were terrible attacks in Al-Mawasi last night in Gaza, an overnight strike by the Israeli military on a designated humanitarian zone in Gaza killed at least 40 people and injured at least 60. The Israeli Defense Forces said that they were striking a command center of militants and a control center of Hamas at the Mawasi camp. The Norwegian Refugee Council responded to the Al-Mawasi strikes and said that those strikes show that humanitarian zones are now in name only. They said this: repeated strikes in densely populated areas of Gaza, where Palestinian civilians have been ordered to flee, demonstrate that Israel's unlawful relocation directives have failed to protect or offer any guarantees of safety for Palestinians. They said last night's attacks on the Al-Mawasi area took place on an area where civilians were told to flee as a part of a humanitarian zone unilaterally declared by Israel. This area, where civilians were killed in Monday's strikes, were seeking shelter and is now reduced to about 13% of Gaza and has a population density of more than 30,000 people per square kilometer. The Israeli military yesterday detained a UN convoy at gunpoint as it was traveling to North Gaza to roll out polio vaccinations in a campaign there. A UN agency said UNRWA's head said that the staff members have since been released. The IDF said that intelligence was suggesting that there were Palestinian suspects on the convoy. The BBC reported in the past few days that Israeli forces have been laying a tarmac on a key road in Gaza along its southern border. This is along that Philadelphia corridor, along the border between Gaza and Egypt. Some commentators are seeing this as a signal that Israel is not prepared to fully withdraw from the Gazan territory anytime soon. The road has become a major sticking point in negotiations for a ceasefire hostage deal. BBC's verified through analysis, satellite imagery, photos, and video that show the surfacing of the road along the narrow but strategically important strip of the Philadelphia corridor. This is between the 26th of August and September 5th that satellite imagery captured at regular intervals showing fresh paving along the 6.4 kilometers inland, that's how far it extends, along the coast through the border fence along the Philadelphia corridor. Hamas yesterday denied that it had made new demands in ceasefire talks, again blaming Israel for the impasse in negotiations. It follows that two U.S. officials saying last week that Hamas had hardened its position. That was reported recently in the New York Times. And the Palestinian Authority has circulated a draft to the United Nations resolution demanding that Israel end its unlawful presence in Gaza and in the West Bank within the next 6 months. The proposed resolution from the PA follows a ruling by the International Court of Justice in July that said that Israel's presence in Palestinian territories is unlawful and must end. The General Assembly of the UN would likely hold a vote next week. That was the Associated Press. In the West Bank, the Washington Post put out an alert today in a rare rebuke. Secretary Blinken of the State Department demanded fundamental changes in Israeli operations in the West Bank after the killing of the American activist. Blinken's comments were the strongest yet from the U.S. official after the 26-year-old Asinur Egi was fatally shot Friday in the protests in the West Bank. The IDF said Tuesday it was highly unlikely that she had been shot unintentionally by one of its soldiers. Reuters reported in terms of the United Nations that the UN General Assembly is likely to vote on that Palestinian draft resolution that I was just speaking about in terms of its unlawful presence of the IDF in the occupied Palestinian territories. So the UN said it is likely to vote about Israel's unlawful presence in the OPT. The key aim of the draft resolution is to welcome a July advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice that said Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories and settlements is illegal and should be withdrawn. So that was by Reuters. Axios reported yesterday that Israel is lobbying members of Congress to press South Africa to drop its legal proceedings in the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, over the war in Gaza. South Africa in late December filed that ICJ case accusing Israel of violating its obligations under the 1948 Genocide Convention. You'll, of course, recall that this was where the ICJ determined that what's happening in Gaza could be possible genocide. South Africa alleged that Israel's actions are genocidal in character because they are intended to bring about the destruction of a substantial part of the population in Gaza. Israel rejected the accusations. Since then, of course, there have been several hearings. The court issued provisional orders, most recently in May, where it called Israel to stop its military operations in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, which it, of course, being Israel, did not. However, it has said that the Rafah operations were completed in the past week or two. On Monday, the Israeli Foreign Ministry sent a classified cable to Israeli embassy in DC and to all Israeli consulates in the US. Those cables indicated an update. The Israeli diplomats were instructed to ask members of Congress to issue public statements condemning South Africa's actions against Israel and to threaten that it could lead to suspending US trade relations with South Africa, which is unlikely to happen because the US wants to maintain its relationship with South Africa in order to counter the influence of Russia and China. Israeli diplomats were also instructed to ask members of Congress and Jewish organizations in the US to reach out directly to South African diplomats in the US and to make clear that South Africa would pay a heavy price if it does not change its policy. Secretary Blinken also said that Iran's move to send short-range ballistic missiles to Russia would trigger sanctions on Iran. Iran denied the accusations, which came as Ukraine was demanding allies to lift restrictions on donated weapons to strike deep inside of Russia. Secretary of State Blinken set to visit Kyiv on Wednesday in a rare visit by a high-level official to Ukraine. Turkey is attending a ministerial meeting of the Arab League for the first time in 13 years today, where its foreign minister will discuss the war in Gaza, according to Turkish diplomats. And a Brooklyn man has been indicted on charges of burning an Israeli flag at Columbia University at a protest in April, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office said yesterday. So that is an update in terms of today, day 340 on this September 10th. May God go before us in our continued efforts towards peace, continue to call for a permanent, comprehensive ceasefire, the release of hostages, those held unjustly in prison, immediate and adequate humanitarian assistance, that the core issues of the conflict be addressed, and that weapons would be withheld since they are not being used in accordance with international humanitarian law. In the name of Christ, amen.